welcome and thank you for joining us here today at this event, which is about open source and Ireland's innovation ecosystem. This is the second in a series of events that we are putting on to discuss open source from a business and commercial perspective, less from a technical perspective, and to talk about the opportunities that open source can provide organizations, and more particularly those opportunities that it can provide Ireland. And we're delighted to welcome a whole host of speakers and panelists here to today's event. I want to first of all say a big thank you to ICT Skillnet for helping us put on this event, and Dave and Sarah in particular, who've done all the work in the background, so thank you both. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce Sarah Novotny, who's our first keynote speaker. I'm delighted to welcome Sarah, who has gotten up very, very early to be with us here today. Welcome, Sarah. And Sarah has had a long career in open source in many, many different companies, has been involved in Google in their open source program office and in many projects over the last number of years, but is currently in Microsoft's Office of the CTO for Azure. And we're delighted to have Sarah here today to talk about how open source is involved in Microsoft's own innovation journey. So Sarah, I will ask you to take us away, and thank you again for coming and joining us here in Ireland.
Thank you, Claire. I'm happy to join you all, and I'm super excited to hear that Ireland wants to know more about open source and start really actively making a national effort or a island-wide effort to, in fact, bring open source in and maybe even enjoy some of the engineering economics that you have as a benefit, where you're not always building piece by piece.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing about this open source joy. Thank you, Sarah.
Yes, this open source joy, exactly. That's my life. So Microsoft, as you may well know, is a 40-plus-year company, 40-year-old company. And it has had both positive and negative experiences in open source. And in the early days, there was a fair challenge in that. We all understand that there is a history where Microsoft has arrogantly engaged with open source and said things about projects that just are untrue. And we have come a full circle through that focus, and are actively and have actively been trying to pull forward open source as a cultural pillar inside Microsoft. Now that includes inner source, which I'm not going to talk about here, but more our open source and our public presentation and the work that we've been doing in that space. So let's get started. Or let's get started if I am clicked on the right window. There we go. So open source at Microsoft is very much focused on enabling our customers and our employees to participate or use open source as they choose to, integrating it into all of our solutions, making sure that, again, we provide the products that customers want, and we are very clear where projects upstream are part of our products downstream. And we always try to work within those communities and with the broader ecosystem of companies that may have formed around that project when we work to integrate something. We also release open source. We have many open source projects that have been released over the last, let's call it 16 years, because that's really when we started the shift, long about 2014, and we'll see a little bit more about that soon. But we also release large amounts of code. So you've probably heard of VS Code, TypeScript, .NET Core. These are all large scale projects. Most of them are fairly led by Microsoft, but we continue to try to grow the communities and their engagements in them. And then of course, we try to make it easy for people inside Microsoft to contribute to open source. And that is an ongoing educational and cultural journey that Microsoft is taking, because there was such a strong negative response to it in the first 25 or 30 years of the company. So we continue to do a lot of enablement and empowerment internally. And actually the Open Source Programs Office vision is Microsoft's vision, which is to empower everyone to do more with technology, with just a couple of words added, which is to empower everyone to do more with open source technology. So that alone, I think, speaks to a very big transformation, is that we can take the Microsoft vision and then also just add open source to it and find it to be a division vision for our company as well. So I've talked about this journey for the last 14 odd years or 16 odd years, and this chart gives you examples of how we've been continuing to grow, continuing to invest in first party projects and making sure that those projects are available and engageable with the open source community outside of Microsoft as well. So I mentioned that mission of the Open Source Programs Office being just adding the through open source. And that is the core of our open source strategy here at Microsoft. We want to make it really, really easy for businesses, because we have a fairly decentralized model for this. We want to make sure that the businesses inside Microsoft are able to make the right decisions with the right help from subject matter experts. And that is our OSPO and our open source ecosystem team. And those subject area experts, as complemented by a volunteer group who we refer to as the open source champs, those people are all the people who are engaging in both the Microsoft internal cultural change and the external perception change that we're seeing. So the OSPO, in a lot of cases, facilitates communication across the whole of Microsoft. So we're not talking about a small group. We're talking about 140,000 employees, give or take. And we're talking about trying to make this a opportunity for businesses to make their own decisions, but know that Microsoft as a whole supports contributing to third-party software, open sourcing first-party software, and also working actively in the old world specs organizations and some of the newer ones who are more, or the old world standards organizations, as well as some of the newer spec organizations that are using more of an open source model for this. So in the role, kind of at the hub of open source for Microsoft, is this OSPO, Open Source Programs Office. And that is one of the key points that goes out and touches all the way across Microsoft. We have specialists in legal, we have specialists in HR, we have specialists in security, accessibility, and of course we have to make sure that we bring our executives along with our vision and our plans. All of that is support for the engineers who are actually doing the hard work out in the open source community. To be fair, it's not only engineers. We have lots of PMs that are active in the open source communities as well. So maybe it's more, think of it as the engineering group, because you'll have engineers, you'll have PMs, you'll have people who are working on community or trying to establish culture in a particular project, as well as trying to contribute code, change features, and make sure all of that goes back upstream. So this is a pretty big shift. I mean, it's happened over 15 years, but Microsoft has gone through a huge cultural shift in that time. And I actually asked a few VPs when I was participating and considering joining Microsoft, what has made this change happen so fast? So I want to go back to my timeline slide, that one. What has happened, why this has happened so fast, is it was both a top-down model. You see here that Satya in 2014 said Microsoft loves Linux, and a bottom-up where you have engineers saying, but I don't have to rewrite this, I could use this tool, or but I don't need this to build my own library, I can use an open source library. So you've got this top-down pressure of Satya saying, hey, we're all in on open source. and the bottom up pressure of, cool, we really want to do open source. And suddenly you've got the perfect space for catalyzation of this change. And so as you see, we have gone the full gamut in this. You know, we've open sourced VS Code and .NET Core. We have now services running Kubernetes. And then in 2019 and 20, we were super excited to do more partner-based integrations into Azure. So we have things like the Azure Red Hat OpenShift offering, and that is done in partnership with Red Hat. And there's a Hashi console service, same thing, all in concert with those software companies, so that they are able to also benefit and engage with and grow in that open source ecosystem. Stop for a moment. This work continues today. I don't get to tell you about the secret bits, sadly, but they are secret bits that will involve open source and will have them coming out in the future. Whoops. So let's go ahead and pop through the programs office again. We were facilitating communication across all of these different groups. And then let's touch on what we've really learned. This is not a straight line, and it is not going to distribute itself equally. I've been using the William Gibson quote, I think it is, that the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. I've been saying that inside Microsoft about open source. Open source is here, it's just not evenly distributed. So I occasionally find a team that asks, can we actually offer this patch upstream? We'd love to, and we have to walk them through that and the guidance, and then we get to introduce them to all of the super cool tools that the OSPO has built for us in order to allow for compliance and safety and decrease our risk as an organization. Next up, I mentioned keeping executives interested. If you have your executives or your leadership understanding that these are very long plays, these are very long games, and that there is a need in many of the big projects to potentially also enable your competition as you are building this project. Kubernetes is a great example of this. Kubernetes was announced by Google in 2014. They took about a year, did some, not big noise, not big effort or big publicity efforts for about a year with Kubernetes. Then it came out to be 1.0. And that's when we founded the Cloud Native Computing Foundation and worked to make Kubernetes the shift in the industry that it has been, to move the industry from talking about a cloud native workload as running on an AMI. Now that A sadly didn't stand for Azure, all the way now to having software vendors talk about shipping their software in containers now instead. So in 2014, when Google announced it, 2015, this was not an industry-led project. This was not a community-led project. But in order to move the industry, you needed to build that momentum within the industry. And doing that means getting the community to know where their place is, know how they're contributing, have them feel a part of a bigger journey, and make sure that they are able to engage, grow in the project, and of course, feel as if they are having an impact. Now, since these are such long projects, now just like inside a company, you might spend 2 years developing a project before you actually go out and build a product. You have to keep the executives understanding and engaged with your timelines, what your expectations are, what your productization plans are, because open source projects are fantastic. They're great ways to collaborate, but that's not generally what an enterprise will consume. Or you find that the companies that are participating in those projects and actively contributing to those projects may consume the raw source. But most companies will either look to have a binary that they can check against, check their own compile against, or they will look to compile their own from scratch, or they will look for something that is supported and managed as a binary by a company that can then offer them liability limits and support. So you have to keep the executives interested and teach them all of the long timeline in this and the potential upside. It is also an important thing to talk to them about value of community and how hard that is to track. Another key point that we found was investing in operational excellence. I can't lean on this enough. It limits risk for companies when they know how they are using open source, they know how they are consuming open source, they know that they know and can feel comfortable in the fact that they are consuming open source in a safe way. And some of those tools that Microsoft has developed in that space have also been open source. There's a project called Clearly Defined, which helps track license dependencies and imported code licenses for large scale projects. We also find you have to care deeply about the product and portfolio experiences. You have to understand how all of this fits in your vision. You also have to know what you're expecting from your community in this, and then try to reward those activities. If you're expecting your community to help you contribute to a single project, but not define or evolve or build it into a future, then you want to be pretty upfront about that. You want to be sure that you are investing in these projects that you are depending on, and that you are understanding how you can engage with them and make changes in them if you need to. Another thing we found is culture. It turns out we have lots and lots of messy problems in tech that can no longer fit in a single brain, or maybe even in a single team's set of brains. And so the hard problems that are left require industry level thought and change. And that means that you have to bring together groups of people that don't have a standard culture, that don't have a base level of almost stereotypical things that they can expect. I can expect some things from Microsofties because they share the vision of the company with me. They share the values of the company. I can say the way that we lead with our managers, and say something about create clarity and create safe spaces, and everyone will understand that that's the Microsoft piece, and that's shorthand for the bigger value set. Now, when you're trying to bring the whole industry together, you don't have that bigger value set. You don't have that default shorthand that you can use until that community develops its culture. And when you're creating a whole new open source project, you want to spend time on that culture, because as I said, the technical problems, they're hard, but they're usually deterministic, and the human problems are rarely deterministic. So spending time on developing that culture so that there can be peer leadership, holding each other accountable for good behaviors, holding each other accountable for deadlines, that culture of peer leadership as opposed to a hierarchical leadership needs to be invested in. And then lastly, in all of this that we learned is you can't go it alone. I've talked a lot about culture and how we engage in our projects, but the commercial portion of the open source community is super important as well. So we've taken a couple of specific approaches to open source in the cloud, and that is this. We've got 4 specific approaches. We enable open source to be run on our cloud and our cloud well. So if a customer wants to bring in their own version of an enterprise Postgres, an enterprise DB Postgres database and put it on top of Azure, we want that to work really well. And we want to say, go team, you have fun with that, and we will help you where it interfaces with the Azure cloud. We also work to integrate things where we build with the companies that support and maintain open source projects, offerings that are deeper and broader through our platform, where there is a very large community, but not necessarily clear vendor leaders. We often work directly with the project. We release open source, lots of it. I saw a number the other day that said we've released more than 6,000 projects, but I didn't put it in the slide because I wasn't sure what the date was on that number. We also contribute. We want to contribute upstream. We want to participate in projects that are important to us and that we depend on. And there are so many. When we look across some of the numbers that I popped out early on, there are so many. Oh, I didn't put them in the slide deck. There are so many places that we actually contribute, and so many projects. So let's go ahead and talk about the open source. Oh, and I forgot the ecosystem. That's why it's a build. We also actively participate in the ecosystem, and that is, of course, across all of the foundations that manage many of these open source projects. We lead and develop partnerships across all of our, across history here and across all of our Azure properties to make sure that we are doing well by the community. Bill used to say that for every dollar Microsoft makes, there should be $10 made in the partner community. And we still want that. And we still are trying to work with that in a strong ISV relationship set, and just generally making sure that as this is a huge market, we don't have to play it as a zero-sum game. We can totally play it as partners, working together, sharing pieces of this pie, and going ahead and working to make our customers' experiences better. So these are the quick numbers that I was going to throw up for enterprise, open source enterprise at scale. We have 60,000 tracked open source dependencies used in 9.5 million places. More than 30,000 employees work in GitHub, and we have released more than 6,000 projects. Like I said, I don't know the date on the 6,000 project number, so that may be a little bit out of date, but that is where Microsoft is. And Satya has another great quote: "Don't judge us on what we've done in the past. Judge us and hold us accountable on what we're doing today, and help us to be better in that," because that really is our goal. Thank you. And you get to also see all the images of all the GitHub employee GitHub pictures for you here. So these are all Microsoft employee GitHub pictures.
And it was fantastic to see the evolution of Microsoft's journey. I'm an ex-Microsoftie myself, and even in the 3 years since I've been there, I think that they've come a long way. So it's wonderful to see that. And it is amazing as well to hear about how this is not just a technical challenge. The organizational behavioral challenge is so important. And in fact, the broad array of people that you have involved in that in Microsoft, including business and legal and all the rest of it. So thank you so much. We really appreciate that.
Happy to.
Now, I would like to call another speaker from, again, the West Coast of America. I would like to call Joseph Jacks, who I see has come into our speaker room. And hopefully Joseph Jacks, or JJ as his friends call him, and we're all friends here. So JJ, we'll call you JJ from here on in. Hello and welcome. JJ is coming with a background in startup financing. So he's coming at this from a slightly different perspective, but he's the founder and partner of OSS Capital, and speaking to us today from San Francisco, so welcome. And we're hoping to hear from JJ a little bit more about the commercial side of open source and looking at companies who have leveraged open source and how they're deriving value from that, and in fact deriving value from their investors and the VC funds that support them. So JJ, if you'd like to share your screen and take it away, we'd be delighted to hear everything you have to say. Thank you.
So thank you so much for having me. I'm, as Claire mentioned, my name is Joseph Jacks, and I'll be talking about costs, commercial open source software, sort of a little term that I like to use, and why I think costs is the next $3 trillion category. So just a quick background on myself. I was extremely lucky and fortunate to be involved in the Kubernetes community pretty early on. That's actually how I got to know Sarah. So Sarah, you might remember our first meeting at the Palace of Fine Arts there in San Francisco. I think it was
Oh, yes.
November 2015. And yeah, I mean,
It would have been, yeah.
Yeah, I feel so lucky, and kind of I credit everything in my career and my life to Kubernetes, and more specifically to open source, really. But my background is actually, I was homeschooled, I had amazing parents, never, there's a truck driving by, apologies for the background noise there. Never went to a traditional institution for college or schooling, but I was very lucky to have amazing parents that homeschooled me. And I actually wanted to be a classical guitarist, but I got into tech and kind of in the technology world, mostly in different sales roles. And I think my second sort of real job ever was I was a salesperson at this open source ETL sort of data integration company called Talend. And that's really where I learned a lot about commercial open source and just open source in general in a sales role. And then a couple of companies later, I'm sort of making my background here a little bit more concise, but I actually found myself working at a company called Mesosphere, which is now known as D2IQ. It's sort of the company behind the academic predecessor to Kubernetes. And then after that, I kind of somehow I again got very lucky to get involved in the Kubernetes community and got attracted to that, which is where I was kind of also accidentally responsible for helping start the first Kubernetes company, kind of helping people learn about Kubernetes, and we helped people with training and services, and sort of built like the first Kubernetes web UI. And then KubeCon, I think, was the big thing that I'm really proud of kind of being involved in and helping with early on there, which eventually got donated to the CNCF, which is part of the Linux Foundation. So I was involved in the CNCF for a little while. And a lot of what I've been thinking about over my career has kind of focused on this commercial open source dimension. And so right now, I'm mostly working on sort of a collection of things in the commercial open source domain. So I started a small venture fund a couple of years ago called OSS Capital. We also organized a conference called Open Core Summit, which we were very honored to have Sarah keynote as well as a keynote speaker for the first event we did in San Francisco. We got very lucky with timing. It was just before coronavirus. So I think it was one of the last kind of larger conferences that happened, just before coronavirus struck the Bay Area and globally, obviously. We also run a social network that was launched pretty recently called Cost Community. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but this talk really digs into what costs is about. And for me, costs or commercial open source refers to a type of company. And I feel that they're very different companies. They're sort of almost different in terms of the way one species is different than another species in biology. And I'll kind of dig into that, but the first thing I wanted to say is cost is not FOSS. So FOSS, or open source software, really means a lot of different things, but it does mean something very specific. And most critically, it's a type of innovation paradigm. For me, it's kind of refers to a type of development model and licensing model and collaboration model, and it's really focused on technology. Whereas with commercial open source or costs, this specifically refers to a type of company and nothing else. So I'd like to dig into what that definition entails. So costs really refers to any company that depends on the coexistence of an open source core. So to kind of give you some examples of what this means. There's a set of companies on the left and there's a set of technologies on the right. Companies like Acquia, Automatic, Confluent, they sort of fundamentally depend on the coexistence of typically one core open source technology. And as a consequence, my view has been and continues to be that these companies are very different sort of in the way they behave, the way they operate, the way they think about the business model, the way they evolve their products sort of strategy and many different things. And to sort of make this more concrete, I put together a little chart that sort of unpacks a lot of these differences in a little bit more detail. And so you can see sort of on the left, the sort of opposite of commercial open source companies or open core oriented companies are referred to as closed core. And most SaaS or most software as a service companies are closed core. They're fully proprietary, top to bottom. So in terms of distribution, it's very expensive and costly. In terms of patents, they're typically covered by lots of different patents. The marketing aspect is really driven by this sort of user acquisition, conversion, sort of freemium funnel. And a lot of those things are very well understood. But if you look at cost companies or open core oriented companies, the way they implement the business model is very different. The way they think about hiring is typically very different, and a lot of other aspects. And so one of the sort of things that we've been doing for a number of years, actually about 7 years now, is we've been maintaining this sort of index of the largest commercial open source companies in the world. And over the last 10 years, this index, as it were, it's really a list of private and public companies. So it's not really an index in the technical sense, but this index has grown dramatically. And if we were to look at the year 2011 or 2010, just a decade ago, there were probably only about 5 companies that were qualifiable to list on this index or on this spreadsheet. So you think of companies like Cloudera and actually maybe not even Cloudera, but maybe just Red Hat, SUSE, Mozilla Corporation potentially, and maybe a couple of others. There were very few businesses in the world that were built around this kind of commercial open source approach. And if you fast forward a decade today, we've seen just an enormous amount of change and growth, and really interesting growth. So, just some of the numbers on the bottom there. Hopefully the text isn't too small. So if you're curious to really dig into this spreadsheet, you can just go to the URL on the top. It's oss.cash, and it's a public Google sheet. So it's a pretty simple data set. But over the last 10 years, cost companies have raised more than $13 billion in venture capital. They've employed more than 70,000 workers and created those jobs. They've generated annually today, every year, almost $20 billion in revenue per year. And the value of all these companies combined is close to $250 billion. So it's a pretty incredible data set. And one of the things that is useful to sort of think about in looking at this is that there are a large number of companies that did not exist a decade ago that have really taken advantage of this commercial open source model. And without getting too deep into the weeds, typically how the business models work is you have the open source technology solving some really critical and really valuable problem in the technology stack, typically infrastructure software or sort of distributed systems, cloud technology, cloud tooling, developer tooling. And those communities grow, and there's lots of exciting adoption and industry adoption and standardization potentially. And then you have a company, or really a collection of companies ideally, coming together and building commercial tooling, commercial services, commercial products and offerings around those open source technologies. And just to kind of give you a point of view over the last 3 or 4 decades in the software industry, the very first kind of wave and movement in the software industry, in my opinion, at least historically, it was really packaged software. So the vendors would build a physical packaged product that would be shipped to customers, typically in a CD form or in some physical storage medium. And in order to update the software, the customers would have to make another capital purchase essentially of that packaged product in order to get an update or in order to get additional functionality. And there was a few changes there in sort of this perpetual licensing model and maintenance. But essentially, this was the sort of packaged software wave, and that first wave. And that was really like probably about $1 trillion in value created in that first wave. The second wave is really SaaS. And this coincided with the rise of the internet. So the rise of the internet really made it possible to distribute software as a service in a very reliable and predictable and trusted way. And so companies like Salesforce really pioneered this category in the same way that Oracle and Microsoft pioneered the package software category. But what we saw was really in the last 20 years, just another huge wave. And this SaaS category is valued at around $3 trillion today. What we think the next category will be, and not necessarily that will replace the previous categories, but potentially augment them and provide some evolution in the company ecosystem here, is what we think is costs and commercial open source companies. And so these companies really build their technology and their value creation very differently as compared to SaaS and even further from custom off-the-shelf software, commercial off-the-shelf software, package software. In that, the companies typically start building an open source technology, and they do that first, and they build a lot of value for many stakeholders in a large ecosystem. And then over time, they're able to much more efficiently discover business models that actually work for them. So there's a lot of evolution, a lot of business models, a lot of really interesting ways of commercializing. And the main thing that I'm passionate about doing is encouraging more open source developers, open source software creators to start companies, specifically to start commercial open source companies, because it gives them the opportunity to capture a small slice of the value that they create for the world, as opposed to not capturing any of the value they create and working for another company or seeing their software benefit many stakeholders without participating in some of that value capture essentially. The other positive aspect that forming a company around an open source project provides, and it's not always necessary in all cases, but what it provides is a sustainability mechanism as well. So you can have the company raise capital, or you can have the company generate revenue. And if you're successful at doing either one of those things, you can really take a huge chunk of those proceeds, of those resources, and invest it in the open source community, and specifically in your open source community, which really serves to provide a huge amount of leverage and a huge amount of sustainability around that. I wanted to add this slide. It's actually a slide that I shared at the first Open Core Summit. So Sarah, you might remember this one, but I thought it would be relevant since since we have Azure represented here. But a lot of people, they really look at cloud providers and commercial open source vendors, and they look at them and they say, these two kind of categories are at odds. They're fighting with each other, and they're really competitors. And I personally, I don't view it that way. I think there's a lot more opportunity for collaboration, for partnership, for integration. And just to kind of highlight a few of these things, if you look at the cloud providers overall on one side, and then if you look at commercial open source companies overall on another side, and you look at the differences, the differences are really profound, and they're pretty easy to sort of tease apart. So typically cloud providers have very centralized platforms. The market dynamics are a little bit more monopolistic, and they're much more permissioned in terms of how you access the technology. You sort of have to get the permission of the cloud provider to benefit from their technology. There's also a lot more breadth versus depth. So cloud providers tend to have many services, hundreds of services each. Market dynamics tend to be a little bit more zero sum in terms of how primary services are adopted, like for example, like Amazon S3, or in the Google cloud side, Google Kubernetes engine, or on Azure. I'm sure there's a wide range of products, maybe the Office suite of services, or I'm sure there's 3 or 4 critical services that Azure provides that are really you can only get them from Azure. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, that just creates more innovation in the market. And what I feel also happens with cloud providers is there's a lot more globalization and distribution advantage. And a lot of that also trends more towards homogeneity. So cloud providers are sort of continuously innovating against each other and standardizing more and homogenizing more on the interfaces. Now, if you look at the commercial open source vendors, all of those distinctions, I won't go through each one again, but they're actually quite different, almost in the inverse. There's a lot of decentralization properties because of open source, and there's much more of a positive sum aspect. And so I guess I just want to leave it there. I'm happy to take any questions if we have time. This was a pretty high level presentation, but I guess the main message in closing that I'd like to leave you with is open source is really the fundamental driver for all digital technology innovation and value creation in the world. It is my point of view. So I don't think cloud computing would exist without open source. I don't think blockchain cryptocurrencies would exist without open source. Frankly, I don't think the software industry would exist without open source. But what we're starting to see is a new model and a new approach for building companies that are explicitly and sort of fundamentally based on an open source core. And that's really exciting. And I'd like to encourage more people to start those companies and to learn more about them and to understand them. I'm on Twitter at async.io and happy to take questions.
Thanks so much, JJ. Thank you so much for that. But I just want to say thank you again so much for your presentation. I think what you've outlined in terms of the opportunity is huge, and we're seeing that across the board. I mean, even here in Europe, there was a recent event by Open Forum Europe where they reported, or they gave some preliminary results from a report that they're currently doing about the opportunity in Europe, and they listed that even a 10% of an increase in open source contributions in Europe would result in about 1,000 new startups being created, and I think upwards of $100 billion euros in GDP per year. So there's a huge amount of value that is being created, that will continue to be created by open source and people who invest in that. And now what we're going to do is actually hear from a couple of companies on the island of Ireland who have been, I suppose, thought leaders who have already started investing in open source, who've seen these opportunities, and hear a little bit from them about their journey and where they're coming from. So if I can ask Connor, Keith, Phil, and Sinead to turn on your cameras and join me here on screen. Well, here we go. Hi, Connor, how are you doing?
Hello.
And here's Sinead, hello.
Hi.
We're all here. And we've got Keith coming in, and if we can get Phil, then we're all here. Fantastic, everyone's here, brilliant. So we don't, unfortunately, again, have a very long time to chat, but what I'll do is I'm going to give a quick introduction. You wave when I call your name, okay? And then we'll go into the questions. So we've got Conor O'Neill, who's the Chief Product Officer from Nearform. Hey, Conor. We've got Keith O'Murray, who's the Services Manager for OpenApp. Hi, Keith. We've got Phil Weir, from the Executive Director for Flax and Teal, and we have Sinead Redmond, who is the Chief Operating Officer in Togon Labs. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us here today. Great to hear some local stories now. We've heard from some global experts. We get some local insights now. That's great. So I suppose I might start with you, Keith, because when we did some prep call earlier, we were talking about some of people's back stories and history around open source. Keith, you've been leveraging open source in OpenApp for some time now. Maybe you can give us a little bit of a story about how OpenApp is using open source.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us. OpenApp have been around for nearly 20 years now in Ireland, delivering open source software. Our basis is predominantly in the healthcare sector. We do operate in other sectors, but healthcare is where we started 20 years ago, almost, delivering an open source solution to Beaumont Hospital. We use proprietary software where it's necessary, but for the most part, we stay on the open source side of the table. All our server stack, our tech stack is open source. Our databases are all the tools that the guys use on a daily basis are all open source. It enables us to deliver something to our customers that only what they need, only include what's required by the customer, not a big block, not bringing a sledgehammer to crack a nut. We bring exactly what they want. It lets us keep things up to date, maintainability. It lets us, because we're writing everything bespoke, apart from using open source solutions that are already out there, it's configured to suit exactly the customer's requirements. And we're not dealing with little customers. We're dealing with like HSE, Department of Health, Department of Education, Transport Infrastructure Ireland, the RSA, the CSO, the OSI, the GAA, the Guards, the Coast Guard, the Air Corps, and on post for all their parcel delivery services. We provide back end to all of those, and front end solutions. So, like, it's there, it's being used, it has been used. Sometimes they don't know that it's because of all our software is web delivered. They don't know that they're using an open source solution. The people who procure it know, but it's not the driving force behind it. I think they should be agnostic to the back-end technology behind it, apart from the fact that we should be trying to drive for interoperability and some sort of open data standards for us all to be able to onboard, offboard different products, different customers.
Brilliant. Thanks, Keith. And like, I mean, it's fantastic to hear how you've been leveraging that for the last number of years. And I suppose, Conor, I know Nearform well. I worked with them in the past as well, but maybe you can also tell us a little bit about your history with open source. You have even a slightly different kind of experience. I know you've been big contributors to the Node.js community in the past. Maybe you can give us a little bit of an insight about how Nearform have been leveraging open source.
Sure, yeah. I mean, we were very lucky back in the early days in Node. The guys realized that it was, you know, they felt it in their bones that it was going to be huge. So they didn't just use it as a delivery mechanism, like a way of building apps faster, which is generally what you hear when people are using Node. But they decided that it was actually important to contribute back into the project, and not just the core Node project itself, but you know, the wider ecosystem. So, you know, we've employed a lot of open source developers over the years, and in many cases working full-time on open source, not necessarily working on customer projects, to, you know, do the rising tide thing that, you know, we contribute to this project, and this code that we contribute helps us to you know, deliver to our customers, helps them, and then helps our competitors, helps everyone out there. But we have seen the benefit come back to us many times over as a company, and you know, in terms of the growth of the company. Like, we are seen as one of the world leaders in Node, and you know, being responsible for where Node is today and the success of that project itself.
It's funny, isn't it? Because, like, I mean, I don't know how many people know that, like, one of the biggest contributors to the Node.js project, which is like significant, is based in Waterford. I mean, you know, it wouldn't necessarily be something that people are familiar with, but this is, of course, part of the challenge we all have, because, you know, being able to find each other is one of the challenges that we have. But I mean, and you're not even based in Waterford, are you? You're based in Cork. This is another one of the wonderful things about open source. You can be anywhere in the world and still make a worldwide impact.
It's so true. I'm in Bandon in West Cork. I haven't been in Tramore in a year. It's surprising, but you know, it's Tramore. It's not Waterford, as Keith likes to point out.
County Waterford. Apologies.
But it has actually been critical, because, you know, everybody says they have the best developers, and we say we have the best developers, but we actually have, you know, to use, you know, in inverted commas, world famous developers working for us, people who are known across the industry, who live nowhere near Tramore, who live nowhere near Ireland, but because they can work, and we've always been remote, we've always been distributed, they know they can easily work in that environment and do the work they like to do, but be part of, you know, this Nearform ecosystem, wider ecosystem.
And I think Nearform, I mean, most recently has been involved in the COVID tracker app from Ireland. And, you know, I think what I found really interesting about that story was basically how, you know, having worked with the HSE here locally to develop something that then became something that was a standard across the world, but also gave opportunities to Nearform as well, in terms of being able to offer kind of other opportunities, commercial opportunities in other parts of the world. Can you maybe talk about that for just a sec?
Yeah, well, you know, what people don't realize is, you know, that, you know, it's the HSE app. Some people call it it's the HSE app and the Department of Health app, and they open sourced that, and we worked with them and aided and assisted with that. But there were states in the US that would not have engaged with us unless the app was open source, and that's the sort of big step change that's happened, particularly in public health as a result of the pandemic, that open source is now becoming the de facto way of building these apps. They saw how well it worked here. They saw how well it worked in other countries, and they went, we want a bit of that, please. We don't want a proprietary system. And now, as a result, as you say, we're now seeing this sort of follow-on work that's got nothing to do with COVID, but it's everything to do with open source and open source platforms, and this realization that, oh, there's a better, faster, cheaper, more transparent way of building applications for the public sector.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Conor. Sinead, I'm going to come to you now, because Togon Labs has a really interesting story as well. I mean, you're the first startup to launch out of the Linux Foundation Open Embedded project, and I know that, again, coming from distributed team, I think, in Ireland here, but making waves globally. Maybe you can tell us a little bit of your story.
Yeah, sure. So as you've mentioned, yeah, we're the first startup to launch out of the Open Embedded project. So we're a small tech company, incorporated in Ireland, of course. Most of our small workforce is based in Ireland. We're founded 4 years ago. And like Conor mentioned, we've been fully distributed since long before the pandemic, long before it was cool.
It's always cool, Sinead. It was always cool. They're just catching up.
Fair. And what we really love about how we work is that we get to bring open source culture into a workplace environment. So that culture of collaborativity and constant openness and working together. So the idea that if you have a question, you ask it on the general channel. You ask it to everyone, instead of being like, oh no, racked in fear that you should already know this, and you should have to hide the fact that you don't know this, and maybe ask someone really quietly so that nobody else hears. So if you have a question, probably other people have that question as well. And even if they don't, it doesn't matter. It's okay to have questions. It's okay to look for help. It's okay to collaborate. Talking all together is the only way to breed that kind of psychological safety where learning and growth happens at its best. So that's the kind of open source culture that we constantly strive to keep in mind for our workplace and kind of all aspects of how we do business. Our specialist area is open source hardware enablement, open source embedded devices and their operating systems. We're also, as you know, Clare, because I've kind of let you know this a few times, in the process of launching a big umbrella level project with the Linux Foundation in an exciting area. So to be telling everyone about it.
I think that's brilliant, and I think it's a fantastic, like, one of the things that I find so interesting about the open source community and ecosystem is that it gives people access to really like the experts in the world, no matter where you're based. I mean, before this, so much business and commercial opportunity was generated based on where you were located, right? Like you had to kind of, walk the streets, press the flesh, all that sort of thing. In the open source community, that just doesn't happen. You can create these marvelous connections and relationships and, full commercial relationships from a distributed, environment. Isn't that marvelous? Like, I think that's just
and I think that being that ahead of that trend meant that many open source businesses, for example, ours, even though we're a very small business, we weren't negatively affected by the downturn of the pandemic. In fact, we experienced growth last year and could even higher, which I don't think a majority of companies, even in tech, could say. Because we weren't negatively impacted by the sudden move to not in-person communications, because we do that so often anyway. And as Conor and both you have said, being able to hire people who are just giants in their field. Now, our CEO and founder, Beth Flanagan, is somebody who's just universally known in her specialist area throughout the Linux Foundation for years and years. Now, she is based in Ireland, has Irish heritage, and is up in Leitrim. For anyone on the webinar who's in Leitrim, you should go and look her up from a distance, maybe when this is over. Don't think she thanks for that, actually. Bring her a cup of coffee. She might talk to you. But being able to bring that kind of weight of experience and tech fame, I suppose, to our small startup in Ireland, and being able to hire people and attract people internationally to our startup on that same kind of level of experience and knowledge, and just really heavy hitters in their fields, but not having to say to them, but you have to move to Ireland, or if you don't want to, or you have to come into our office and commute from 9 to 5 every day. Being really flexible in how we work and flexible in how we approach the idea of work is just, it's a massive privilege, and it's really exciting and really attractive to people as well.
And what I'll say is, I mean, you're verging into that open hardware space, the open source hardware space. And I think, it was one of the questions actually earlier where John Labin was actually saying, Microsoft have also been involved in that and in the Open Compute project. I mean, that's a whole other area, a whole other, ecosystem and a set of opportunities that we probably aren't even going into here in enough detail, but let me assure everyone we'll definitely come back to, because I've been learning a little bit more about it recently, and there seems to be a huge amount of opportunity there too. So but congratulations, and congratulations on your upcoming launch. We'll be all keeping our eyes peeled to that.
We can host another event, Claire, when it happens.
We will. That sounds like a good plan. Phil, I'll come to you now. You're based up in Belfast in Northern Ireland, but I know from our chats that you again have had open source at the core of your business for a long time. So can you maybe tell us about a little bit about the history about Flax and Teal?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So Flax and Teal actually started because, as with many open source activities, I was scratching an itch, and I was working in engineering field, and I've been quite frustrated by the fact that we were working with tools where it was very hard for us to assess or understand the analysis that we were actually then sending on to customers. And so I have always had a passion and interest in how open source can have an impact on the economy, and public and private, and thought, gotta put your money where your mouth is, and been running Flax and Teal for a number of years now, with our primary focus being around open source product and service. And I think that's something that we've had to be very creative about. We've had to look at ways that actually open source provides us with opportunities that we wouldn't otherwise have. There are challenges, I think everyone will agree, and on this call, that there are challenges with an open source business model, that there's a lot of received wisdom that you get that doesn't necessarily apply or work in an open source environment. And one of the things that we've had to do is say, okay, well, what does work in an open source environment? What can give us a competitive edge? What can give us a USP where potentially competitors won't have that? One of those areas has been collaboration. Where we've been able to say, okay, well, let's work together on one product, and let's work together on another project or product with another customer or group, and we are able to share that code freely and transparently. That's one way that we've seen R&D become streamlined by working in an open source model, even as small businesses.
And I think that's really interesting, just to kind of deep dive on that, because there is this perceived wisdom out there that you can't do services and product development simultaneously. But in your case, you can, right? Because the services work is actually building components that could then be used in the product. So and there's no kind of messing around with IP or anything like that. Like this is something that is of benefit to you for a longer term.
Absolutely, and I think that's something that we've tried to demonstrate and got positive feedback from all of the customers that we've worked with in this way. And we said, look, what we are trying to do in all of our work is effectively building something a bit more like a skyscraper rather than a series of independent buildings when we were working on different projects with different customers. That actually we're reinforcing, earlier customers will get the benefit of work we do with later customers will get the benefit of work we do with earlier customers, and actually we're generating value simply by working on your project. And it is something that we've had to more generally, I think, focus on what can we achieve with open source as value for our customers, because I think one of the things that we've always been very keen on is that open source is something that is adding value, and therefore we want to be selling a premium service. We want to sell a solid service. Not we want it to always be value for money, but we're selling on the benefit to customers, which should, in our minds, should exceed what we would be able to do by doing the same thing proprietary or closed source. So you mentioned there, it also provides us with efficiencies. So we can say, okay, well, actually, we're going to we're going to do work on, let's say, data. A lot of our work is with data, open data, closed data. It's often with web. Casey, a qualified Kubernetes consultant as well. So, you know, we do a variety of service work and training as well. But that feeds into, for example, we're currently doing a coding challenge with the Open Data Institute around, this is an exciting one for any other folks in the north on the call, is digging into unstructured data, specifically the NI Hansard assembly minutes. So if anyone wants to get some free Just Eat vouchers, keep an eye out for that. But that's all things that we've been able to kind of work in together, and it's allowed us to get to a stage of selling products and being listed in the UK digital marketplace.
So I suppose it's interesting to like, so what I'm hearing is that like there's a lot of value that being or investing in open source has given to your organizations themselves, whether it be making you more efficient or helping you get up to speed quicker, or giving you market access, or allowing you to work in this distributed way and with an open collaborative way, either within your organization or with your customers and partners. But it also sounds like there's a lot of value that can be then transferred to the customers, to your end customers, as a result of that. Like, so for example, as you've pointed out, Phil, you know, when you're building services project after services project back into a central project, everyone wins. Like current customers, future customers, past customers, they're all winning at the same time. And like, it's really the tide that rises all boats in that respect. Plus you've got the opportunities for partnerships with other people in the open ecosystem, like in the open hardware space or the open data space or whatever as well. There seems to be a lot of collaboration that happens cross company. There was one other topic that we talked about, I know, in our prep call, that I just want to touch on here, because I think it was a really important one and it came up with a number of people. And that is about the benefit as well of that when you use open source technology, it gives you more choice, and it also helps you kind of offboard quicker, which some might say, well, you know, you're making it easier for people to offboard your technology, but that's actually a huge value to your end users, right? In terms of allowing that. I know, Keith, you talked about that before as being one of the things that you think is a value add to the customers in the end.
Yeah, I think it's a big de-risking factor as well when you're talking about somebody making a big investment. Will we be locked into you for 5 years, 10 years, or are you going to build something that nobody else understands? And we're not. For the most part, if they want to offboard, this instance, and there you go. It's still running, and here's the GitHub, here's the repo. Get somebody else to manage it for you. We don't want our customers to do that, but there's reassurance, there's de-risking there that's involved in that when we're at that position.
And yeah. I'm sure they rarely do, but at least they have the choice too.
Yeah, they're not paying for an escrow service somewhere by a third-party company. They're not looking after all these things. Yeah, we're manage all that for them. Yeah, and it is a good selling point that you can have access to your data, all of it immediately.
Yeah,
we trust you enough, we'll give you a log on. Most people don't.
And I think, you know, even that trend seems to be actually being mirrored across the world. I mean, there's definitely, you know, news and murmurings from the European community as well about the fact that, you know, people want more choice. They want opportunities for choice from different instances of various different pieces of technology and things like that. So that choice and that de-risking seems to be a big part of the whole open source movement as well, which is great. So if I can ask now, so thinking about this, right, and thinking about the fact that you all have been doing this for some time, so you're old hats at this stage, but there's a lot of people who maybe aren't aware of these benefits and are maybe only exploring this for the first time. And then also thinking about the fact that, like, you know, what can we do in Ireland? Like, if I can leave this open to just wave at me now if you've got a point of view, but what do you think we can do in Ireland to actually help companies like yourselves in terms of actually being more successful? Okay, Sinead, right in there, come on, give us a...
I meant to say this at the end of when I was talking, but then I've been talking for too long as usual. Where we've seen an area that we in particular want to improve in is our profile within Ireland. Like, we have a solid profile in our specialist area internationally. We're well known, people go to us for things. But our connections into the Irish open source community is somewhere we want to do better. But as you identified earlier, it's because it's difficult to connect into that community because we're so dispersed and we don't have a very central hub or even any real concept of ourselves. So that's why we were so excited about today. We're hopeful it'll be the first step into doing that work of defining ourselves as a community of opportunity to grow and flourish all together.
I'd echo that as well. I mean, it's the same problem within each of our niches. We're extremely well known, but as soon as you attempt to, I suppose, go outside of your niche, and we had this a couple of years ago when we first started getting involved in data science and so on. Where do we find good open source data science people? We don't know anything about this subject, and in our case, we ended up connecting with someone in Denmark because they were connected to the Node project. But we would have loved to have done that within Ireland and so on, but we didn't have those links. So anything that can be done to work across the individual and the issues, I think, would be fantastic. And I know in our case, very recently we've been getting a lot of informal connections and so on from state agencies. They've been fantastic. They've always been fantastic, but just particularly recently. So if there was even more of that, and informal, I'm not talking about, let's set up some massive database, but something like that where all those little connections can be made, would be fantastic.
Well, I think as well, I mean, back from what people have been saying earlier in this discussion as well, it strikes me that there is also a job of work to do to make people more aware of the opportunities here, whether they be Indigenous companies who are starting up new startups or services or whatever, but also the end customers in terms of helping them understand why it's important to look at open source as an alternative as well. Well, I mean, I think I can say, wouldn't it be a pleasure to actually get this moving forward and actually keep connecting and all the rest of it and create something a little bit more formal around that? That would be great. Anything else? Any other things we should put on the list of stuff? Phil?
Yeah, I think actually just something you touched on there, and it is, I think it's really important, is awareness of value. We wouldn't be able to do the work that we do without our customers and our collaborators seeing value in us creating open source, and not just value as it's a good thing to them, but as value as this is something worth paying for. And I think that for us would be hugely beneficial in Ireland, is a better awareness within the innovation sector, but within public sector, to why people producing open source is a benefit to them and is worth them investing in. And we can point to some of our customers if they want to chat to people. I'm sure everyone in this panel can. And if that's something that by linking together we can do more effectively, then why not? Excellent.
Well, I think that sounds like Keith, come on.
Sorry, some of the awareness. People who are preparing procurements, awareness that you don't have to lock people into a proprietary vendor. You don't have to, should there be something on a checklist at the bottom? Yeah. Does it need to be this vendor, or will an open source solution will it be accepted on this solution? And a little bit more trumpeting by probably ourselves. This is open source. Awareness that, oh yeah, that's open source, that's open source. Oh yeah, they're all open source. Oh, the biggest company in the world is open source everywhere, top to tail. Yeah, it would help us along the way, everybody.
Well, they all sound like fantastic ideas, and hopefully we'll be able to take those forward to our next meetings. That would be great. I think in general, the entire building up awareness and skills in this area, it just seems like it's such a huge set of opportunity that's out there to grab. So we'll be looking forward to that. So I want to thank you all now. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of the panel session, but I want to thank you all for your participation, and hopefully we'll see you back again soon. And good luck with all your ventures. And thank you so much for joining us here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire.
But James is the Director of Community for FINOS. And thank you so much for joining us here today, James. And we're looking forward to hearing more about the rise of open source in financial institutions. Thanks so much.
So thank you very much, Claire. I'm now all set up and ready to give my presentation. So thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm James McLeod, Director of Community of FINOS, and we are the Fintech Open Source Foundation. We're based globally, and we are actually a Linux Foundation project. And I did actually hear the Linux Foundation being mentioned in the earlier panel discussion. and I'm here today to talk about the rise of open source in financial institutions. But before I do that, I thought that it would be useful just to give you a brief kind of like introduction to who FINOS is and who we represent within financial services. So we are a foundation and we're independent. We're a non-profit member organisation who accelerates collaboration and innovation in financial services. We are on GitHub, so you can actually go to github.com/FINOS. And see contributions that have been made into our repositories. The contributions that have been made are Apache 2 licensed, and so people can go into GitHub and clone projects, get involved in our meetings, raise issues against it, and even raise pull requests, you know, if you sign the appropriate CCLAs, etc. Now, we have been around for a little while. I'll talk about the history of FINOS in a second. But we are actually a very diverse open source foundation. And as you can see, we have a lot of banks who are actually part of our membership, alongside a lot of tech companies and also a lot of consultancies as well. So just to pull a few names out, Deutsche Bank are heavy contributors into FINOS, alongside Citi, alongside Nomura, and also alongside Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. We also have Capital One, HSBC, and Wells Fargo. And so you'll notice that there are names that you recognize throughout the EU, and also names that you will recognize from, you know, the US. But we also have big consultancies. So Accenture has recently joined us, and Wipro are also a keen contributor into the foundation. But we also have tech companies like SUSE, and Red Hat and GitLab and GitHub. And so it's a real diverse mix. And we've really just introduced associate members such as the Alliance for Innovation Regulation and ISDA. And so we've got like a real kind of mix of regulators, fintechs, banks, and also tech companies amongst the community. And the reason that we exist is it's kind of like a bit of a digital transformation ethos within financial services, as we move from, you know, being an industry that kept secrets to themselves into being an industry that's all about collaboration and moving faster. And so we recognize that through open source, you can reduce costs, you can improve time to market, and efficiencies by removing duplication of effort, etc., whilst also sharing, you know, experiences and also educating each other. You can attract and retain talent. So as people come out of university and they're aware of, you know, open source and what it means, and cloud adoption, etc., you know, those people can move into financial services knowing that they understand, you know, what the technology is and, you know, how they can get involved. You can de-risk your software. So the more people who scrutinize the software that you are developing, the higher the quality and the bar of quality and deliverables. And, you know, it also takes you from issues being raised to resolved a lot faster. And you can also simplify your workflows. And so through special interest groups, you can really define a common language of understanding and bring people together from across the sector to really define that. And in doing so, we create this, you know, rich, diverse, efficient, talented pool of, you know, software engineers and also other domain experts from across financial institutions, fintechs, regulators, and tech firms as well. And we're also welcoming other people to join. And so you don't have to be part of financial services in order to be involved in FINOS. And we welcome participation from all over the globe. So just to give you a quick overview of where we've come from, we've actually been around since 2015. And so this isn't a new concept that we are pitching. We were actually started as the Symphony Software Foundation, who are a communication platform, a little bit like Slack, but for the financial services industry. FINOS was created to extend open APIs that Symphony have to create bots that you can actually bolt onto Symphony in order to make the platform more efficient. But within the rise of fintech and banking and open standards like open banking, it was recognized that, you know, by drawing a boundary around Symphony, we were actually excluding a lot of other innovation. And so throughout this timeline until present day, we've actually created ourselves as an independent foundation called FINOS, up until quite recently when we joined and were acquired by the Linux Foundation. So we're part of the foundation that has Node and CNCF and other Linux projects. And in between that, we've got a great dossier of other banks who have joined and banks who have contributed into the foundation. And we've also recently started our special interest groups, which discuss industry problems where other initiatives can actually be spawned from. Now, the reason why we exist, as everybody on this call knows, I mean, I know that you've been talking about open source, so I don't need to linger on this slide. But the world that we live in within technology is basically constructed through open source from beginning to end. From the IDEs that you write your code through, all the way through to your DevOps CI/CD platform. Jenkins actually probably runs a lot of that, all the way through to the tools that are integrated into your CI/CD for checking, malware vulnerabilities and license compliance, all the way through to a lot of the technology that's running on the cloud right now. All of that is open source. That wasn't known not so long ago to banks. But since a lot of engineering leads have become part of the bank's C-suite, all of this wealth of open source has been opened up to a lot of other stakeholders within risk and compliance and legal, etc. And so open source not only has been demonstrated to banks as a way to speed things up, but banks also have realized that they need to be in control of it as well. And so, by being in control of it, they want to partake in, contributing and consuming it in a safe way. Now, the reason why open source is so important in banking, it's actually an agile digital transformation story. So open source is kind of like, a big piece of a bigger puzzle. And so if you think about the way that banks have actually been creating their software, it's been very industrial revolution. Take your requirements from your product owner and then hand it down the team, the conveyor belt, all the way through testing and into production. That's the traditional old school way of banking software engineering. So when tests actually fail at any point, within this production cycle, it shifts right back to the beginning and you have to start that process all over again. And so that became very inefficient. And so as more people joined banking and as engineering got more of a voice, it was quickly understood that we needed to become more agile. We needed to use automated tooling and become a lot more collaborative and give engineers the ability to choose their own tools, and bring them into the bank rather than it being prescribed. And so feature teams within individual banks were given the opportunity to lead their digital transformation from being siloed teams into being teams that are self-sufficient and had a lot more autonomous, ownership of their solutions. And that's where open source and also cloud, kind of fits into the financial services story. But in doing so, what we actually found was that as teams were becoming more efficient as individual product teams, even though they were becoming more agile, shipping faster, collaboration between project teams was actually becoming still inefficient. And so there was a massive so there were silos being created between teams and a big kind of like gap in the middle where if we were to become a lot more efficient, at working joined up, we could actually push out a lot more efficiency. And so we would get the prioritized features, the defects and changes and infrastructure and run coming into individual teams, which will still lead into duplication of effort, limited communication, and relearning the wheel. And then you apply that across the world, all of these banks, all of these teams in banks doing things individually, without being joined up, even though they're delivering their own products efficiently, they could do a lot better. And then you've got to join that up in terms of, the global view. So within FINOS and within open source and the way that we're collaborating and transforming banking, what we have realized is that the connections between people and teams remove the silos that lead to software development inefficiencies. So as you know, it's not just about consuming open source and using it, and kind of ramming it into your software. Open source is about the bringing together of people, connecting them together through events and meetups and tech sprints, agile ceremonies, going into other people's teams and learning what they're doing, wikis and online forums, and kind of having your ear to the ground. And so within FINOS, we run news, events, and project updates, from across the financial services industry, and you can actually subscribe to those through www.finos.org. Now, after you've joined people together on the inside of the bank, you start getting into a cycle, what we call open source readiness. And open source readiness is, taking the immature bank and making it, ready to engage in the open source. And part of, that transformation journey is actually what we call inner source. So it's, how within banks can we share the software that we do as teams across the inside of the corporate firewall and get the scrutiny as you would get, from an open source team across other people's projects, but within, the confines of your firewall. So you're actually kind of putting training wheels on your team and you're pushing forward all of those behaviors. And that is called inner source. It's something that Clare is actually involved in through Inner Source Commons, but it's also a special interest group that we've just started within FINOS, where the first meeting is on March the 10th, and people are more than welcome to join that and figure out more about Inner Source and how that relates to open source by going to github.com/finos/inner source. Please come join the SIG. Now, once open source communities develop and improve software through code contributions, ideas sharing, defect fixing, documentation, and continuous education, you take all of that, what you've done on the inside, and this is where FINOS as the open source foundation comes into its comes into the picture. Not only do we train the teams, and also engage the compliance and regulation and policy teams and, the cloud and infrastructure teams on how to improve efficiencies on the insides of banks to get them access to the outside. But once they're on the outside, FINOS is the place, the go-to destination for all of those various different engineers and banks themselves to collaborate through GitHub and to join, all of those teams together and become even more efficient on that global scale, as I was pointing to before. And so FINOS is the open source foundation that helps within the regulated industry, keeping regulated engineers safe when they make that step into the globe. And in doing so, we actually provide a number of different areas. I was talking about open source readiness and getting people over the line, over the boundary from internal work into being open source ready. But we also have a project called Open Developer Platform, which is the CI/CD needed in order to run an open source team on GitHub. So when you actually raise a pull request, make a commit, you have all of your actions triggered, and then we run a pipeline of scrutiny, so automated checks that actually takes that project and delivers it into a registry, and or delivers a bunch of issues that you need to tidy up. And so that is, teaching banking engineers how to become efficient as fully, rounded DevOps engineers as well as software engineers. And where this actually leads to are projects that people can engage with right now through FINOS and through GitHub. We have data visualization projects that have been contributed into the foundation. So Perspective is a contribution by JP Morgan. Waltz is a contribution by Deutsche Bank. We have data modeling through Legend, which was contributed recently through Deutsche Bank. And we also have Morpher, which was recently contributed through Morgan Stanley. Within the cloud space, we realize that there's a lot of inefficiency where internal infrastructure teams are creating their services, individual team by individual team. So cloud service certification brings all of those teams together around the compliance requirements to create services for GCP, for AWS, for Azure, and also Red Hat have engaged through OpenShift as well, to come up with the compliance scripts, write infrastructure as code, and also use BDD to test and scrutinize those scripts as well to make sure that they are compliant. And within the interoperability and standards, we have FDC3, which is how you pass data around the trading desktop, and Plexus, which is very similar, is how you actually use FDC3 to pass data from one application to the next on the trading desktop. But I've also spoken about special interest groups. So this is the coming together of industry minds. So DevOps mutualization brings the teams on the inside of banks together in order to talk about the problems that they would like to solve within their SDLC, so software delivery lifecycle. And regulation innovation is bringing together software engineering in fintech and banking with the regulators about joining those two kind of industries together to become a lot more efficient and making sure that everything that we are creating is regulated. So this is the big question. Are you ready to join the FINOS open source community? And I sincerely hope that you are, as technology companies who want to get involved and create a bigger, more efficient financial services industry. And in doing so, it's very easy. Please visit finos.org, get involved to evaluate what we're doing, to consume some of our projects, to participate in conversations, and then bring people, developers, engineers, and people who can contribute code or contribute thought into issue writing, anything that can pave and push the industry forward. And then even, join the foundation, lead a project, and grow your career through us. And so with that, Claire, I certainly hope I didn't overextend. That's who FINOS is, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, James. You were bang on time. Really appreciate that. And thank you for that wonderful overview. I think it's so marvelous to hear about the financial services industry collaborating in that way. It's really, really a fantastic improvement, I think, in terms of when we look at what the opportunities are around that. And also, thank you very much for giving the call out for the InnerSource special interest group that is starting up there too. Sarah mentioned a lot about the open source culture being so important, and InnerSource is about basically tackling those challenges about making sure that people can collaborate effectively and all the rest of it. So thank you so much, James. What I'm going to do is start off by giving a quick introduction, or just to list off everyone that's joining us here today. And I'll ask you to wave as I do, so everyone will know who you are. But because we have a limited period of time, it's sometimes easier just to go around that. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Leo Clancy, who's the Head of Technology for Consumer and Business Services in the IDA. Carol Gibbons, who's the Divisional Manager for ICT and International Services in EI. We've got, or Enterprise Ireland, should I say. We've got John Whelan, the Commercialization Manager in Trinity. Hi, nice to see you, John. We've got Colin Keogh, who's an innovation consultant with Inelcom, but also was the lead on the Open Ventilator project. So welcome, Colin. We've got Barry Lowery, who's the government CIO, and we've got Mark Jordan, who's the Chief Technologist for Skillnet Ireland. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here today. I know you've probably been listening to a lot of the conversation that's happening so far, but now we're going to hear a little bit more about how your experiences have been around the open source ecosystem to date. So, Leo, I might start with you, actually. You obviously in the IDA have been working with a lot of the large international companies that are out there. How have you been experiencing open source in recent times? And have you been seeing growing trends in that area?
Yeah, thanks, Claire, and hello to everyone. Delighted to be here. Yeah, open source is very important, and I think if we look at some of the presentations earlier, it's almost a who's who of who our clients are and our target clients are. So really important to us, because a lot of the people invested in Ireland already are huge open source users, are hugely committed to the communities, and because those we want to continue to attract to Ireland are huge on open source, either companies that depend on it or that use it. So I think there's a huge swath of companies that are interested in open source and that are interested in Ireland being positive and open source, to the topic of this conference today.
So Leo was talking about the large companies, but from an Indigenous business perspective, like how have you seen this happen in Ireland? Have you been seeing trends in terms of the open source ecosystem, and how has Enterprise Ireland been dealing with that?
Well, thanks a million, Claire, and I've really enjoyed the presentations and particularly the panel discussions. So we're seeing more companies coming to us seeking investment, in particular on the startup side. that are using open source and developing new business models in particular. And from that perspective, actually using open source and creating services and customization in terms of that business model as well. Where we're also seeing hugely is that for startups and more established companies, in terms of, open source gives a huge ability to be able to scale and scale fast within that community. And we're seeing a lot of companies on that development track as well. And there's some companies that are here today and have presented that we would work hand in hand with. So it's I think we're seeing more and more companies being profiled, but I still accept the point that Sinead made in terms of actually how do we profile more in terms of the open source community here. And it's something actually, Clare, you and I need to have a bit of a chat about, and how we can create maybe an Irish advantage piece around this. And I think it'd be really, really positive. So we're seeing a lot of great companies coming our direction that are ultimately using open source.
I think that's great. Thanks a million, Carol. And I just want to add in, what we're hearing as well is that open source doesn't even just help people scale, but that kind of disruptive nature, it helps people disrupt some of the kind of the more established players. So, here's to more of that, I say.
It does actually, without a doubt. And I think James, the last speaker there, actually described it really, really nicely in terms of the banking sector. And he said that it was an agile digital transformation. And I thought that really, really summed it up, because that is actually what is needed in a lot of cases here. And we should see more and more of this coming to the fore.
Thanks a million, Carol. And John, I'll go to you next because, I think Sarah in her earlier presentation mentioned the fact that the Open Source Program Office was part of her work. And I know there's been a rise in open source program offices being created more recently. We've even had Lero, which is the Irish Software Research Centre, recently announced that their open source program office as well in the last few months. But Trinity has had an open source program office for a number of years now. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about Trinity's journey and how you found that.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. We've been involved. I'm responsible for the commercialization of all the software that comes out of research in Trinity. And for the last 10 years, open source, as we know, has been around for years. And it's just reaching a tipping point with the big tech getting involved in the last few years. But we would have licensed our Trinity IP to startups, spin-outs, campus companies from Trinity who were wholly based on open source 10 years ago, software radio systems. Last year we had a company, Terminus DB, which is an open source non-SQL database. So, we're well aware of it. Researchers are well aware of it. It's kind of standard practice. What we have to try and do in our role in the big bad tech transfer office is manage people's expectations and, bridge the gap of cultures between, traditional tech transfer who would view, oh, you're giving it away for free? I don't know. This is, the Irish taxpayer is invested in this. So, free, we have to get that lesson across that it doesn't mean free as, JJ was talking about commercial OSS, core source business models. There's many ways to build really scalable Irish businesses around open source. There's a lot happening. A lot of open source originated in universities. That's our job. MIT license, the BSD license from Berkeley and MIT, obviously. One point I would say that I think these presentations have been great, talking about fintech, but where we would see in research, the real opportunity in open source, a big opportunity for Ireland would be around telecoms, because the whole telecoms paradigm is shifting from hardware to software. So there's things like the telecom infra project that we're very much involved with Dublin City Council, Sligo, County Council, and Facebook. There's incredible things going on, and there's you talk about disruption in telecoms, and that's been really driven by open source and software defined radio, software defined networks. So that would be just one takeaway that I would really like to emphasized from our view at the moment.
It's a great point, John. And I just want to say, it was only a time limitation that we didn't have more people with different focuses in terms of their industry expertise. I mean, in my experience, I think, it's been really illuminating to see how many industry clusters are now being, specialist clusters are forming around open source. And pretty much all the industries are covered, for everything from connected health to manufacturing to autonomous vehicles to, in every space. So you're dead right. And no matter what industry people are in, I think there's opportunities to connect to an innovation ecosystem around this. But thank you for that, and congratulations, actually, because I think the idea that your OSPO allows for a great execution alongside the traditional TTO IP transfer kind of process, that's a great achievement from Trinity's perspective. That balance is important.
Thanks.
So next I'll come to you, Colin. You were involved in the Open Ventilator project. I mean, it was an amazing example of community coming together. I mean, when we talk about innovation ecosystems, we often talk about these triple helixes or quadruple helixes where we get people involved, like individuals. And I think that's, again, one of the benefits of open source, that you're not just talking about company organizations, you're talking about mobilizing people with a passion around this area. Can you maybe give us a little bit of background about the Open Ventilator project and what you achieved with that? Because I mean, the scale is something phenomenal.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So yeah, the gist to me, it's hardware. So it was medical based hardware. We started out around, it would have been about, it's the anniversary a year ago next month, that when COVID started, and it would have been very early on, 15th of March, I think it was. The whole world was in a panic and wanted ventilators. Every single person on earth procure, buy and source ventilators from every corner of the world. Myself, having some experience with a foundation I set up a few years ago in running open source remote development projects online, again, hardware, focusing mainly on prosthetic hands, 3D printed prosthetics. It meant that I was already familiar with that sort of space. So like an awful lot of technology projects these days, it started on Twitter, a Twitter message. I came together with two colleagues of mine and we set up the open source ventilator project here in Ireland. And I think over the course of 7 days, we went from 3 of us to a final number, I think, of just over 4,000 collaborators. And a month later, we were working on, I think there was 17 ventilator concepts and then about 30 other developmental projects working hardware to help support COVID, face shields, masks, purification systems, education apps, heart tracker apps. Yeah, it was a strange time in the world where open source hardware in particular was never more open, willing, and accepted, and it was never more of a community. We had people that were engineers, doctors, nurses, unemployed students, artists, farmers. Everyone was locked down, everyone was at home, and everyone was looking to help contribute in some way, and they did. And on the same front, same projects, we were working with Ford Motors in the US. We worked with Amazon's AWS hardware in the US as well. PCH International. For a very, very short time, we had a position on the World Health Organization's COVID Intervention Council before we got sense and gave that to somebody with more merit in it. But it kind of showed you the power of open source projects when all of the dynamics in the world allowed them to happen properly. But the core element I liked was that was led solely from Ireland. All of our core management team was here based in Ireland. Luckily, most of us knew each other before. And it was advertised around the world as an Irish-led project. So, it was great for promoting the idea of open source in a very medically regulated field from Ireland as a whole.
And isn't that amazing? Because when you hear about the speed at which that took hold, and I think you've mentioned before that there have been a number of actual commercial projects that have come out on the back of that.
Some elements needed to be patented or protected for security, health, and safety. And, so we had every gambit from free online resources to closed source developmental areas. It was fully fluid, it was fully open. And I think it gives a nice roadmap for how you can implement open source for every area, every project in every field in the future.
but also emphasizing the fact that you don't have to be really technical to get involved in open source, so that, there are lots of opportunities to participate in these kinds of collaborations when you're not necessarily technical. So it provides people with an onboarding as well into these areas of digital transformation. So thanks a million, Colin. Barry, I think we'll come to you now. I mean, we've heard from, the academic side of things, the commercial side of things. Obviously, everything that was happening with COVID is very close to, from a government perspective at the moment still, I guess. But can you maybe have a just comment about open source from a government perspective?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, congratulations on the event today. I've really enjoyed it. I've managed to sit in on all the sessions. It was very interesting, actually, that you opened with Sarah and Microsoft, and she started off with a confession about the Microsoft attitude in the probably the 80s, most of all. But I was thinking, in some respects, the ecosystem that government would tend to use most sprung out of that era because of the nature of the COTS industry. We started a process of buying solutions which was very much waterfall driven, which was very much dependent on a very rigorous formulaic procurement approach, very risk-based, very much aware of the fear of tie-in. And over the course of this afternoon, you've started to debunk a lot of that, those ideas, this idea that obviously open source creates a capacity where you can easily move your IPR from one company to another, so there's not tie-in. And then there's an opportunity, obviously open source is almost dependent on agile, which probably leads to better fitting products developed faster. So all of that's very exciting. From a government point of view, I think there's two challenges. One is that, there's still a huge investment in terms of job creation and so on in the traditional COTS world. And so government, because the first thing it looks for when it develops large systems or purchases large systems is sustainability of support and skills. And one of the difficulties that we've had in the past when we've looked at open source is there hasn't been the same availability of skills in certain open source products as there's been in the COTS equivalents. And that's just where we've been historically, because Ireland did develop a very strong indigenous industry around the very large COTS solutions, mainly American based, some European. So I think we probably need to go through a process where we dismantle parts of that. I think that there's some systems that we probably will be using license for a very long time, ERP being a classic one. But I think what we've discovered is for a lot of the new systems and a lot of disruptive technologies and the opportunities that disruptive technologies offer us, that we need to look at a different way of procurement, and we need to look at being more confident ourselves in terms of how we access skill availability and so on. And I was interested, you were mentioning this idea of the helix, the whole concept of GovTech and government now, as ministers would talk about it, is about building digital government around the needs of the citizen, but collaboration with academia and with industry and across public service to deliver the best solutions that can be reused many times. And I think there's a real opportunity in there. We've been working closely, for example, with Blockchain Ireland recently, and one of the things that would be really good would be to start to try and use the members of that to start to address some of the problems that we see. I like the ideas that the big wicked problems that you try and resolve, that we get into that habit that's how we do things, and we encourage the best of our talent to come in and work in a very agile way with us to start to try and drive forward fairly fast solutions to the problems that we have.
And I guess one of the advantages to that approach is that, as Colin has pointed out and other people have pointed out, like there are opportunities then for people to follow on from that, to actually build services and products on the back of that, and to hopefully lead the world in that respect, you could say.
Absolutely. I mean, you brought that point out in your discussion with Connor from Nearform earlier on. The great thing about that particular solution was not just the collaboration between public and private sector. It was actually the collaboration between the Department of Health, the HSE, and Garda Síochána, and the Office of the Government CIO. That was very powerful in itself. And it's very interesting actually trying to do agile projects across Zoom or Teams, which was a good learning opportunity for us. But I think the way that obviously our interest in open sourcing the contact tracing app was first and foremost transparency. But we also knew that there was going to be a very positive knock-on in terms of take-up, because I think the world stood aghast when they saw how quickly the Irish people adopted the app and were using it, and it was very successful. And of course, because of that, as Nearform said, it started to be used all around the world, most recently actually in New Zealand. And New Zealand is one of the countries that Ireland would look at as an exemplar in terms of digital government. They do some fabulous things. So it was lovely for me to be interviewed by the New Zealand press because their government had decided to use our app. So yeah, I think there's fantastic opportunities in all of that.
Yeah, I just as a side story, I remember when the COVID tracker app was first open sourced, one of the first pull requests that were put in against it, I was watching, and it was someone who said, "You're not spelling Cahir Saiveen right," and like I was thinking, isn't that marvelous? Like, talk about engaging with citizenship when they can get their priorities straight and get Cahir Saiveen spelt right. So that's citizen enablement for you. But thanks very much, Barry. And it sounds like some of us have our jobs cut out for us, Carol. It sounds like there's lots of opportunity for support and services there. But I'll come to Mark Jordan next, because obviously skills has come up a lot. So there's lots of opportunity there as well for us to build these skills in Ireland. Can you maybe talk about how Skillnet, or what part Skillnet might play in that?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Claire. So we really focused in on, and have been for a number of years, on helping with advanced tech. So there's a number of postgraduate programs around AI, blockchain, IoT, and other areas of technology transformation as well. So it's been on our radar and on our roadmap for a long time. And some of our key pillars as we move forward will be around helping businesses with digitalization, with becoming more sustainable, and in particular around helping the SMEs become more competitive. And we see the route to all of those through the adoption of collaborative technology tools. So for us, we take a lot of guidance from the research that we read around, 70% of all new developments by the end of next year will be built on open source databases, and 50% of all migrations will be taking place in the same way. So we know that that's the secret to moving forward. We also know that big data plays a massive role in this. So when we think and we work with our partners around programs that we believe industry needs, and again, everything we do is industry-led anyway, we try and build frameworks that address things, areas like technology adoption, building digital strategies, what that means to a company, what it means to a business in terms of their overall objectives and goals, and what are really the tangible steps towards digitalization. We think about the frameworks around leadership and agility, and how we get leaders and executives on board with the adoption of different technologies. We believe, understand about cultural teams, all of the meta skills involved in adopting this technology as well, around teamwork, negotiation, areas of problem solving, etc. So we see the opportunities when we work with companies to digitalize is to offer a blend between what are sort of the technical components, but also what are the soft components of development as well. But with a real view to how we help simplify the process of digitalization and really selling the output, and particularly around the types of analytics that can be used. And then when we're working with the bigger companies, it's really thinking about the three breakdowns of who in the organization, the leadership, and what do they need to get on board? What do the experienced technologists need in terms of upskilling and reskilling? And then what do the practitioners need? And they're the cutting edge, they're the data scientists, they're the researchers, they're the analysts. And we're trying to create frameworks that fit both vertically and horizontally within all of the businesses that we work with.
Thanks, Mark. And it's fantastic to see that idea of the different horizontal layers that you're looking at, and indeed, knowing as well that these things are more than just the technical skills and looking at that kind of holistically. So it's great to hear that Skillnet will be looking at that. Now, now that we've all talked, Leo, I want to come back to you. Sorry, we missed the end of what you were going to say earlier, but I didn't know if you wanted to comment a little bit more about what you're seeing in terms of the larger organizations around open source.
Yeah, I'm sorry about earlier. That never happens. I think it must have been that jury-rigged open source router that I put together especially for this meeting or something like that. But apologies, my wired Ethernet dropped and I've gotten back on Wi-Fi, so I need to reboot some stuff. Thanks for the patience though, and this has been a super interesting panel. The point I was going to make second is, so first of all, open source is very important to industry, and what Ireland does in open source really important to global industry. And as I said, some of the companies we saw in the presentations earlier are a who's who of our current and target clients. Talent is the other side of that equation, as we've talked about today, and really important to talent that people moving to Ireland can have an opportunity to build their skills, and the lingua franca of open source, frankly, is your contributions to communities these days. So people need to be able to continue that. They need to feel they're coming into a location with a vibrant community in their skill areas, whether that's hardware, software, or other areas. And I think it's hugely important that we all get behind what you and ICT Skillnet and others are trying to do, Clare, for that very reason, that we build out that community and that talent proposition, as well as the companies that can offer the clients talk about talent coming to them who are very, very well paid senior architects and developers. And one of the job conditions isn't additional pension money or additional salary or additional bonus. It's being able to spend 10% of their working time contributing to their community of choice and building their reputation for their next job and their future role. And I think as employers, people have to be willing to allow that, because you will not get the best talent in your company, or we won't get the best talent to move to Ireland if we don't understand that. And I think that's a more cultural dimension than some of the things we've spoken about, but really important. And I think your last panel actually touched on a lot of those aspects of community enabled, and that's important for talent to understand for sure, but also employers.
Thanks, Leo. And I think that's incredibly important. I mean, one of the big lessons I've learned since I've been working with open source communities is that in general, it makes for very happy developers if they're able to scratch their own itch and, do permissionless innovation and basically be able to collaborate. It makes them happier, which makes everyone happier. So so thanks very much for pointing that one out. And I want to now just take the opportunity to thank all of you for your participation today. It's been really fantastic. This feels like just the start of this conversation. In fact, there have been a lot of jobs to be done that I have noted in terms of the whole conversation. So I'll probably be reaching out to you all to follow up on that. But thank you so much. Thank you, Mark and Barry and Colin and Carol and John and Leo. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I think I just want to, again, thank for everyone who came along here today, all our speakers, all our panelists. I think what's very clear about the open source community is just that, it's a community, and everyone can be part of that. And certainly there seems to be so much opportunity for Ireland and for people in Ireland to collaborate, not just with people in Ireland, but actually globally. And if we want to stay relevant and we want to be able to take advantage of these opportunities, we have to do that. But actually, as you've heard here today, there's lots of opportunity for Ireland to lead in the space. And we certainly have examples in the past where we've done it. So I look forward to working with everyone here today to see how we can do that in the future. And I know that that Dave and Sarah are going to be sending out a follow-up form from this event, and I would encourage you all to fill that in, and hopefully we can take the conversation further. Certainly from my perspective, there seem to be a lot of recurring themes, like the fact that we need to connect better together, like the fact that we need to look at our skills here in Ireland, but also just in general, the fact that there is just so much opportunity to play for here. So I really look forward to seeing you all again at the next event. And thank you so much for joining us here today. Thank you so much.